Welcome. My name is Alex Goss, and it is my pleasure to kick us off today at our it's March Community Roundtable. Our session is Interoperable FHIR, Networked FHIR Exchanges, Learnings, and Industry Reflections. I'd like to also remind all of us that we do come and gather here under HL7's antitrust policies to ensure appropriate collaboration and information sharing. The first quarter of 2024 has been a busy one, and it is great to have all of you on today's Community Roundtable. Today's session contains several presentations. First, we'll hear from a team about their experience with networked FHIR exchanges and the lessons they've learned. These presenters include Jim Adamson, Business Transformation Manager from Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield, Dave DeGandi, Interoperability Strategist, Cambia Health Solutions, Michael Gould, AVP of Interoperability Strategy at ZeOmega, Bill Howard, Board Chair of eHealth Exchange, and Karuna Relwani, Business Lead Interoperability, Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. We'll hold a Q&A session after their presentation before pivoting to our second presentation on industry reflections. In the second presentation, Jocelyn Keegan will share her own observations on key events this quarter, as well as inviting our panelists to join in that discussion. Then, in her PM role for the Vinci project, she'll offer remarks on the project community engagement and support. We'll then hold a second Q&A session, inclusive of all of our presenters today. Please be sure to use the Q&A box to ask questions throughout the session. We'll use your questions during our Q&A segments. We have muted your lines to aid the recording quality, and we'll post the slides and the recording to our Confluence page where you registered. Stay tuned, those should be posted sometime tomorrow. We'll also have a survey launch at the end of the meeting. We appreciate your ability to take your time to take a few minutes and complete that survey. Our next Community Roundtable meeting is April 24th. We'll be focusing on testing, and we hope to see you at that session, which will give us a deep dive to prepare for Connectathon and better understand testing with FHIR transactions. Industry events upcoming. State Health IT Connect, I believe, is next week. It's virtual and in Baltimore, Maryland. You can register there. The 2024 Weedy Spring Conference will be virtual and May 13th to the 16th. Registration link included as well. Hopefully you've all seen Save the Date for the CMS Connectathon. This will be the 5th annual and free event. It'll be a testing event, July 16th through the 18th. Stay tuned for more details on that as they are released. But before that July event, there's an HL7 testing event, the HL7 May FHIR Connectathon, being held in Dallas, Texas. Make sure to register by Friday, April 26th to take advantage of the early bird rate. We'll have some more details on the track for Vinci. Jocelyn will be talking about that in her segment of her update today. Following the Connectathon is the May Working Group meeting from May 20th to 24th, co-located in Dallas at the same venue. I encourage you, if you can, to attend both. Also in June, the 10th to the 13th, we have the 2024 HL7 FHIR Dev Days being held in person in Minneapolis. Without further ado, I'd like to jump into our first presentation today by inviting Jim, Dave, Michael, Bill, and Karuna on screen and have them present their Network FHIR Exchange panel.
All right, thank you, Alex. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm excited to bring a panel discussion that we held at HIMSS to the Vinci Community Roundtable community today, focused on the value of network data exchanges and maximizing the utility of standards-based solutions. So we have a panel of network data exchange champions today, some of whom are well-versed in the world of scalable network data exchange and have seen its potential already, and others who are seeing the challenges in adoption and working toward implementing and scaling their own interoperable solutions. So we'll kick off with some introductions. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Karuna, and I'm on the Interoperability Solutions team with Blue Cross Blue Shield Association. And we're actually a founding member of Vinci. We'll go into Dave and Jim, and then maybe Bill and Mike, if you guys want to do some introductions.
Sure. Dave DeGandi, Interoperability Strategist at Cambia Health Solutions. Been trying to transform the way we do our business between payers and providers anyway, in that space.
Jim?
You're on mute, Jim. Jim, you're on mute.
Sorry, guys. Jim Adamson, Business Transformation Manager and Interoperability Lead on our business side for Arkansas Blue Cross. Glad to be here with you.
Bill, do you want to go next?
Sure. Bill Howard, Board Chair of eHealth Exchange, the nonprofit national network, and also an independent consultant doing some projects focused on implementing FHIR in production for both payer and public health use cases. Happy to be here. Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Gould, Associate Vice President for Interoperability Strategy with ZeOmega. I have the unique pleasure to highlight this as a team effort because I had to have Tony Shang, who's also from ZeOmega, stand in for me as our panelist at HIMSS. So I'm getting to rejoin the panel here today. So it's good to be with everybody.
All right. Yeah, we're glad to have you with us today, Mike, too. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So before we dive into our questions, I want to give you a little bit of background on what exactly network exchange is. So network exchange allows for one-to-many connections, streamlining implementations and access to data, and initiatives like TEFCA and other national network organizations like eHealth Exchange have proven successful already amongst implementers. There's statewide initiatives like Washington One and One Utah that are also taking the initiative to implement network exchanges across the state. And the folks on our panel are going to be talking today about a project that we're all collaborating on called the Trebuchet Project to advance the DaVinci guides in the context of scalable network data exchange. Our panelists will discuss the aspects that make network exchanges a feasible, scalable model amongst payers, providers, and other end users, and how it's actively being proven and delivered through the Trebuchet Project, as well as share some of the paradigm shifts that are necessary as we work together to advance interoperability. So with that, we'll kick off with a question about the current challenges to implementing scalable standards-based solutions. So we'll start off with Dave and then Jim, if you don't mind sharing a payer perspective on your barriers to scaling standards-based solutions, before we jump to Mike and Bill to share a little bit more about the technical and non-technical challenges. So Dave, you're on mute.
Try that now. So at Cambia here, we've developed a prior authorization solution which executes all three of the Vinci burden reduction use cases. And we've been in production with a predator.
Oh, did we lose Dave?
Seems like Dave's internet has cut out. Oh, maybe he's back. Maybe we want to let someone else jump in.
Yeah, I'll go ahead while Dave's coming back online. Arkansas is kind of starting with what we would see as foundational health information exchange that is leveraging the DaVinci CDEX and PDEX APIs, CDEX being clinical data exchange coming from providers to other providers or to payers, and PDEX or payer data exchange being a data exchange that comes from payers back to providers, maybe other payers, et cetera. And so our challenge at Arkansas, we're a relatively small plan, a little bit less than 2 million members, but our members are spread across all 50 states and beyond. And establishing exchange in all 50 states with providers that don't know us and we don't know them is impossible to do in today's exchange environment. So national scaling just from a data access perspective is a key challenge. And then doing that at a sustainable cost. Without naming names, we were challenged by, and part of the reason that we got into this effort was that we saw the options out there for direct EHR exchange and other types of exchange as being coming in at an unsustainable cost. Some of those options out there for a single EHR If you look at it across the association, the Blue Cross Association, you're talking about in the range of $1 billion a year for that type of exchange, and we just don't believe that that's sustainable. So we're also looking, in addition for that national reach, we're also looking to commoditize health information exchange so that we really push down on the cost of exchange by promoting open standards from the FHIR perspective, but also from the IG perspective, implementation guide perspective. And if we have that, then we should have a reasonably pure competitive environment where folks are not engaged in competition and price wars on how they deliver the data, but what they do with the data.
Thank you, Jim. And Dave, I see you're back on. Do you want to share a little bit about Cambia's perspective on some challenges with implementing scalable solutions?
Sure. Yeah. I was just mentioning we had a prior authorization solution in production with a provider in the Northwest. As we tried to push that out across our geographical footprint of Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and Utah, we approached 24 different providers, and only 5 of them signed up for something that was free and going to increase their ability to enter authorizations by 300%. And so we found there's a lot of problems with the legalities and the paperwork and those things that are involved in that. And this solution that we're going to talk about offers a sign one document and get access to all, which is very helpful. And it also the point-to-point connectivity with everybody is just not a feasible approach. We need the hub and spoke method to be able to scale.
Hey, Karuna, if I might, Dave pointed to single document, signing the single document, and I intended to include that in the challenges. Today, when payers and providers do health information exchange amongst themselves, they develop very complex DUAs, data usage agreements, and they're one-offs. They're for this provider or that provider, the next provider, from a payer's perspective, and vice versa. And that obviously isn't scalable, particularly when you're dealing with counterparts that are not that you don't know. So the notion of a single DIRSA, with a relationship between participant and QHIN or similar, and the common agreement that covers a single agreement between the QHINs is something that we believe is an essential element to getting national data exchange going. But it is fraught with challenge because payers, for one, are not used to signing an agreement that they cannot modify. So it remains a challenge.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim and Dave, for touching on the friction that exists currently in the ecosystem when it comes to implementing these solutions. Mike, do you want to touch on some of the challenges you're seeing as a vendor supporting some of the implementations, both from a technical and non-technical point of view, some of the challenges that you're seeing in your space?
Yeah, so part of the challenges is really just adopting standards. The FHIR standards for burden reduction are fairly new and are evolving. There's a new STU version as well. So a number of folks have been kind of on the sidelines, waiting for others to jump in. And that's not an unreasonable expectation when it comes to interoperability, because you need others adopting these standards and working with them in production for interoperability to happen. It's not just a singular vendor customer or vendor client relationship. So we need many from the community to jump in. And I think it's also when you go there, the technical challenges of scalability come in as well. So and we'll dive into that more as we unfold this topic.
Sounds great. Thanks, Mike. So, Bill, you're part of an organization that's one of the original national network exchanges. Can you share with us what you're seeing being done today, what's working, maybe some of the challenges that you're hearing about that national network exchanges are able to address?
Yeah, for sure. So eHealth Exchange is a national network that was created about 15 years ago by the federal government, by ONC under HHS. And it was spun out into the private sector as a nonprofit. And it exists today as a nonprofit with a mission of promoting interoperability. eHealth Exchange itself has membership that includes a bunch of the federal agencies like the VA and FDA, things like that, federal agencies. And then we also have about 60 state and regional HIEs as participants. And we also have as direct participants about 75% of all the large health systems in the United States. We also are part of Care Equality, which allows participants on our network to connect with other networks like Commonwealth or Athena or other types of networks like that. And so today, if you're a provider exchanging data for the purpose of use of treatment, it works really well. It works great. I might say we exchange billions of transactions a year. The transactions themselves are sort of an old school SOAP CDA type of a model. And so what's working is purpose use of treatment exchange. What's not working, or what's a gap, or where we really want to move towards, is engaging more than just providers, but also include payers and public health and community-based organizations. And we also want to move sort of beyond exchange of documents like CDA documents and start really to exchange discrete data using HL7 FHIR instead. And a lot of this is happening under this sort of TEFCA umbrella that we'll talk about in a minute. But in terms of today, what we're really focused on is trying to be early adopters of some of these FHIR implementation guides. And we started a year or two ago using a public health use case with the FDA, where we have in production now a bunch of large health systems and the VA basically responding to queries when the FDA has an adverse event reported. They go out and they grab additional data to complete a case. And that use case worked really, really well. And so when we started to hear some of the challenges that Dave and Jim described, and Mike, about kind of friction with payers kind of doing some of these DaVinci use cases, eHealth Exchange joined DaVinci and has been collaborating with this group and with others to really roll out these implementation guides in production, specifically around electronic prior auth and around CDEX, clinical data exchange. And so what we're really focused on is trying to exercise these implementation guides in production and get some real experience beyond the work that happens in Connectathon and implementation guide development, but this takes it kind of that next step in terms of real hands-on production. That's what we're focused on today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bill. So we know the model exists. We know as new implementers, such as payers and new providers coming on board, there's some challenges and barriers to overcome. And we know that there's work being done to overcome this and iteratively define success together. So Mike, do you have any tips or any suggestions or any best practices for how to actually get involved as a potential implementer in testing some of these opportunities, getting involved with network FHIR exchange, whether through connectathons? There's various components involved beyond just the IGs to plug in connectivity wise. Any best practices you can recommend on how to actually get involved in something like this?
Sure. The number one best practice is just do something. Take the first step. Don't be afraid that you don't have a fully elaborated solution. There are a number of component steps to the burden reduction use case and other use cases in interoperability. And it's very hard for any one organization to take a use case from end to end. So really taking that first step and getting involved in testing a specific aspect of it, and finding the partners to do that with. In days gone by, it was harder to find those partners, but now today, there are a number of partners out there to varying degrees of capability, some that are newer and understand the trepidation that you may have to getting involved and testing aspects of this, and others that are more experienced and can guide you in the pitfalls to avoid. But The Connectathon events are important as a stepping stone, but we also need to move to production pilots so that this can be really vetted with multiple partners and the multiple pieces that go to put it all together.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bill, Dave, Jim, anything you want to jump in terms of things you're excited about that you're seeing working that other folks can kind of piggyback off of?
Go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead,
I'll go
Bill.
after you. I'll go after you, Dave.
Well, I was going to mention in Utah, we started a One Utah collaboration that's sponsored by the governor, trying to promote interoperability throughout the state. That's giving a lot of visibility and political recognition for participation in that. That's kind of exciting to see that push along. We're grassroots starting up a similar thing with Washington, the Washington state, as their Senate. They have a Senate bill that passed that require the authorization functionality be in place a year sooner than the CMS rules specified. So a little more pressure on there, but those type of collaborations are along the lines of what Mike was talking about, people engaging, getting involved, and trying to make things work. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think if you take a look at the picture, and also just to explain kind of the trebuchet concept or this collaboration concept, what we've been trying to do is really launch these implementation guides into production, and that's really kind of the moniker of the group. And if you know what a trebuchet is, and if you don't, you can see a demo of one on the link that we'll send out. But essentially what we're trying to do is pick up from the Connectathon work and the implementation guide work and launch these things into production. And what we're specifically trying to do around prior auth is enable providers to choose any sort of all-payer prior auth app, and not have it a deal where we roll out prior auth and have it where every payer has a different app. Instead, what we want to do is have it where you can have a provider choose an app, and then that app should be able to connect to different payers because they'll all have those prior auth endpoints, burden reduction endpoints available through APIs. And so what we've been doing in this collaboration is connecting providers on the left to a network that's, let's say, one of the QHINs, QHIN 1, and the providers will either have native functionality, but today most of them, what they're doing for prior auth is they're using a Smart on FHIR app or a Smart on FHIR app launch. And what can happen then is the provider can choose an app from a selection of different apps, and then that is connected through a Smart on FHIR proxy to a QHIN, who itself is connected to the different payers. And so what that allows to happen is a payer, instead of having to go point to point, they can connect to one sort of hub and allow that FHIR traffic and the Smart on FHIR launch to happen in a network fashion, so that you don't have to have many contracts and many connections. And then the vision is that as TEFCA rolls out and supports some of these other purposes of use, such as payment and operations, these QHINs can connect to one another and allow providers on one network to connect to maybe a payer on a different network, much the same way it works today with providers that are part of eHealth Exchange can connect to other providers that are not on eHealth Exchange through the care quality framework. And so that's kind of the vision, is that we see TEFCA kind of being that vehicle to allow us to connect all these networks together and do it in a way that will really fulfill this vision of having providers have the ability to choose a single app to do a complex use case like prior auth.
Thank you, Bill. Jim, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
I think they covered it. I know that we've got a couple of questions already in the chat, so I don't know when we need to do that. Maybe Alex can chime in and let us know.
I will do that once we get through your panel discussion. And I think there's a call to action slide, and then I will definitely jump into these. They're good questions, and I encourage folks to submit additional ones.
Terrific.
All right, great. Thanks. So Bill did a little bit of our wrap up here in terms of what is our vision for the future. So maybe Jim and Mike, we can get a little bit of a flavor of kind of what are you seeing for the advancement of the Trebuchet project? What are you excited about? Kind of what are a few of your hopes and visions for this project moving forward.
So, Mike, you want to go first, or I'll jump in?
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. I think what we're hoping for is to develop commoditized health information exchange that is scalable across the country at a sustainable cost for anybody that wants to participate in it. And beyond just the use cases that we're starting with, or the use cases that are regulated, we really think that we need to focus on all of those use cases that are important to scaling value-based care. We've been challenged as a country to get value-based care well scaled across the country. And I think big part of that is we don't have these efficient information flows in place. So if we can bring commodity-oriented structure to the pricing of this, if we can use standards where, as Bill said, folks get to choose the app that they work with instead of being required to use an app from any different number of payers. On the provider side, payers can choose the apps that they want to work with. Then I think we have gone a long way to getting to the place where we can scale value-based care effectively across the country.
Thanks, Jim. Mike, you want to land for us?
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand that there are close to 1,000 payers and several thousand providers across the country. So the Trebuchet project is aiming to grow from a couple handful to several dozen in short time, but that's still just scratching the surface. So the call to action here is that if you're an organization that has even a little bit of technical bandwidth and knowledge and willingness and interest, reach out to the Trebuchet project and find a way to participate, even if it's in a small and limited way, or even more beyond that. You can certainly build from a kernel of activity. And then the other thing that we need to keep in mind is, as Bill and others have mentioned, using the app of your choice. It's very important that these apps function to the way that you expect them to, and that they function accurately. So one of the things that we see as valuable is the certification and accreditation of apps. And in short time from ONC, we'll see probably the HTI-2 rule come out, and there's likelihood that rule will call out ways to certify and accredit apps so that they're not just conformant with FHIR, but actually interoperable with other apps. And we want that interoperability accurately in order to succeed at what we're doing as we scale.
All right, thanks, Mike. And perfect tee up for our next slide, Alex, for our call to action. So as Mike said, get involved as much as you can. There is a link to our weekly technical meetings where anyone can join. Alex, I think it's just one slide previous.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. There we go.
No, you're good. Thank you. So as Mike said, there's technical calls happening every week, which you're welcome to join. Anyone on your team, if they want to learn more or formally get involved. There will be something happening at the Connectathon, so please do keep an eye out if you're interested in seeing the work there, or hearing about it, or participating. And we are formally part of the DaVinci project and have secured an initial investment. So you will see more happening with this group here. And as our panelists said, collaborative project, we're all kind of in it together and looking to have everyone be a part and, figure out where you might fit in. So definitely find a way to get in touch, and we're looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you. I think it's really great to see how the DaVinci project is working with this partnership to really incubate the next generation of how we can help advance towards interoperability, and appreciate all of your remarks and coming and sharing your lessons learned, as well as your leadership in advancing how do we meet people where they're at. And so let's go ahead and start getting into some of our audience questions. First one I want to ask you is about how should we approach interoperability at a micro scale, it seems like smaller providers and CBOs need to be adopters as well for interoperability to advance. And so maybe, Jim, you want to kick us off, and then we can round robin to see if others have comments on this aspect of smaller providers and CBOs.
Yeah, sure. I think that it's very much what we've been talking about today. That's the way we get smaller providers and CBOs involved, because what I was talking about was we're working towards the commoditization of health information flows, and bringing down the cost of those flows from big EHR prices to something that is a tiny fraction of that is one way that we can bring more and more providers into the space. How does that happen? Well, it happens because we've got open standards apps that are very conformant to those open standards, and that opens the door to open source apps that become something that is very easy to afford. So I would suggest that what we're doing is precisely what we need to do to open the door to smaller providers and CBOs. And I think, JR, it's a great question, and you guys are familiar with the work that's happening at Gravity with the social determinants of health data definitions. I've been a part of that, but I haven't been a part lately, so I don't know if things have changed. But in my mind, we're receiving social determinants of health data every day in our clinical data exchange that we conduct. It's legacy-based exchange. So I don't see any reason why, as the DaVinci standards advance, why that same CDEX capability and PDEX capability can't be leveraged to move the social determinants of health data that's defined in the Gravity project through these same channels.
Others want to weigh in on the question for small providers and community-based organizations?
So the opportunity for the use of hosted applications in this space alleviates a lot of the development and heavy investment that is required now for individual organizations to make use of interoperability.
Maybe one other thing is that we're currently working with our state HIE as an additional party in our exchange with the eHealth exchange. And we're doing that to prove out that HIE exchange can work in the TEFCA QHIN network environment. And by definition, then many of the small providers in the state of Arkansas, I know, are connected to our state HIE. So getting into an eHealth exchange should be a fairly straightforward process for providers, particularly if we can keep the cost down on participation.
Thanks. I think, Mike, did you want to weigh in?
Sure. And Alex, if you don't mind just going back maybe 2 slides to that hub and spoke diagram we had. As Bill alluded to earlier, we've expanded that from, treatment use cases among providers to bring in payers for things like prior auth and payer data exchange and clinical data exchange. It's just as likely to think of CBOs as other boxes that could be added to this diagram as well. And the thing that we need to keep in mind is that even though the boxes on this for providers and payers are all the same size, not every provider or payer or CBO is the same size. There are some small or some big, different technical capabilities, different resources. So we need a network that meets organizations of all sizes where they are and really streamlines the process for exchange along the various use cases that we need to do. So I think Bill had his hand up next. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to pile on, JR, to your question, the other thing is that the way we deployed this, it's using Smart on FHIR app launch, and most of the small EHRs, large EHRs, all EHRs can actually do that Smart on FHIR app launch. And once you've got the app launched, then the functionality of that app can provide some of this more modern workflow. And so I think the the thing that would be interesting to see is, a lot of these smaller providers that might be on some of the smaller brand EHRs, if they are using certified EHR technology, that has included the requirement for Smart on FHIR app launch for many, many years. And so we're able to do that from even the small EHRs as well. So please reach out if you have a specific scenario. We'd love to give it a go.
Great point. I'd like to segue into our next question because you guys started to tiptoe into that about how does networked FHIR align with the QHIN technical framework? And maybe Bill, you're the logical one to kick us off here.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And Richard, we intentionally chose the term networked FHIR to not get confused with what's being discussed within the QHIN technical framework, which typically refers to something like facilitated FHIR, which is really intended to be sort of peer-to-peer FHIR transactions, or something like brokered FHIR, which would be from an EHR through a QHIN to another QHIN back to the responding EHR. And so what we're doing is something a little bit different, and we're doing it, ahead of TEFCA, because TEFCA doesn't quite support the electronic prior auth or CDEX use case quite yet. And so we are getting our hands dirty using and deploying FHIR in a manner that we think is going to be closely aligned with those QTF, QHIN technical framework requirements. But since they're still sort of not final, we expect them to be final hopefully in the next week or so. And we'll be able to confirm whether we're closely aligned or not. But we're hopeful that that it is fairly closely aligned. And what we did is we are using a manner that is just kind of meeting the EHRs where they are. A lot of them cannot support some of the more modern approaches today. And so we did sort of take some liberties to use approaches that can be deployed with EHRs that are in the market today. So hopefully that helps answer your question. And once that QHIN technical framework version 2 is released, hopefully in the next week or so, we'll know how close or how far away we are.
I think it's really fascinating to see this evolution, having worked in deploying HIPAA and then high-tech meaningful use era to now 21st century cures. This conversation I'm hearing underneath all of your dialogue around the trust aspect and how we're learning from those experiences and really figuring out how to build on the investments and the business choices we've made today for taking care of patients and how we exchange information for clinical purposes, payment, treatment operations, public health, among just a few of the critical aspects of how we exchange data, and that this is a very big change in landscape. What you're bringing forward and how we can really help meet people where they're at and leverage the power and the flexibility of the FHIR standard, because it's a lot more capable of being in our phones and providing those app functionalities that you spoke to. We did have one more question that just came in, and I'll take that before we pivot to Jocelyn. Is there anything else that has driven participation that anyone can talk about further? Bill, do you want to jump into?
Yeah, I'll quickly respond, and others can pile on. But a good example of this is the CMS has obviously been very, very forward-leaning on API development and support of different use cases using FHIR APIs. And in the case of prior auth, CMS is one of the only health plans in the country that today can support the Vinci standards, live in production. And in addition, CMS funded development of an app that can be used to hit those APIs. And some of the use cases might be some of the non-standard use cases that might get used first, even something like checking prior auth for durable medical equipment or oxygen or things like that I think we could see get adoption in different subsections of the market faster than you would expect. So that was just one other thing I wanted to share. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, I'd say that the ways to get involved are really to, again, to underscore the idea of partnership that I mentioned earlier. If you are an organization that knows of other organizations, a payer may know of other CBOs, certainly bring them to the table. That's the way to help advance that. So Jim, I see you have your hand up if you want to jump in next, and maybe we'll tag Jocelyn also. Jim, you're on mute.
You would think I would already know how to
We
do that. We've
practiced
only
There
been
you go.
doing this for how long? But I think the notion of reciprocal exchange between payer and provider, or in particular, I guess this could apply with CBOs as well. But I think that's been somewhat missing from the environment until now, and it makes no sense for a payer to come into this environment and say, hey, we want all this clinical data, but we're not willing to turn around and share our data that we hold on members that could be very helpful to a provider's longitudinal perspective on a given patient. We have to be willing to do that. And when we are, and now that's part of the new regulation, CMS 0057, that requires us to do that. What we need to do to make this adoption happen sooner is not just meet the regulation, but beat the regulation. Payers have these PDEX APIs, Payer Data Exchange APIs, already developed. Many of us do, because we thought we were going to have to make payer-to-payer come to life sooner than we have. Arkansas is one of those payers that has the PDEX API ready to go, and probably needs a little tailoring around the edges to make it provider oriented. But that's another way that we can, as a community, advance this effort and get National Health Information Exchange happening sooner than later. Is that where we can, we work to beat the regulation, not just meet it.
Also, getting in front of the change and not allowing it to create more dysfunction, but really to be the change that it was meant to be, is important.
Yep.
Go ahead, Alex.
I just think it's not just about checking a box of being compliant. It's about also extending it to achieve that ultimate spirit and the goal of what we're trying to do, which is better, more efficient, cost-effective whole person care. So Jocelyn, let's bring us home on this portion of our presentation. If you could just give a little color commentary on trebuchet.
On the brainchild that is Dave DeGandi's trebuchet. So for folks that don't know Dave, during the pandemic, he shared with all of us, literally within the first month of the pandemic, on a Da Vinci sort of replacement for us being together at HIMSS, a demo of the trebuchet he actually has in his backyard that he built for fun. But is for folks who haven't been following along with Google, trebuchet is a fundamental invention of Da Vinci's, or that Da Vinci fine-tuned. And so I think it's a pretty fun play on words, but on a serious note, we're pretty clear about sort of what's in scope and what's out of scope from a program perspective. And up until this past year, Da Vinci members have said, we're building guides, we're evangelizing those guides, we're out telling stories about what's working, we're pulling people into tests, but had largely voted sort of with their dollars to say piloting is on, basically the members to do themselves. And over the last years, we've had more and more go lives from a production standpoint. We got a final rule in place. There was really interest, and I think you heard, the group at the very beginning of the call, elicit some of the pain points that they're experiencing. And we now actually have TEFCA becoming a reality, right? And a look to the payer side of the world and payment and operations being included. I think this is really important because we actually voted, I run our operating committee in Da Vinci, and the operating committee and then steering blessed it this past month to bring trebuchet back into Da Vinci. And, I don't think that we're really clear on exactly what it's going to mean for us to be supporting pilot and piloting activities. But I think that what you could hear is, a really thoughtful group of individuals, and there's way more people involved in this conversation than the 5 folks that are on the phone right now. And I'm so thankful, I know we all are, to the community, to be able to have people that are, I would say, pace setting us from an industry perspective. So I want to sort of loop back on that question about what the drivers are of why people would be participating now or later. And I think you heard, I think both Dave and Tim, and this is what I love about this group, they answer questions before I get a chance to. I think one of the biggest drivers is that we get to steer the ship if we go first. And I think that we continue to do that and invite others, because this is, the way that we are building standards, the way that we are putting this stuff in production and making it actually work in this very iterative way, I think is really showing that we can make the adjustments and the course corrections, to Dave's point, that we actually implement the intent of what we're trying to do, make updates to the actual specs, give feedback to our federal partners about what works and what doesn't work, right? The reason payer to payer was delayed is because the industry said, if it's not codified, we're all going to be moving around big blobs of data for eternity, and CMS actually listened to the industry in that case and waited until it was FHIR based to roll out payer to payer. This is really important. Like, us driving the ship, I think, is really important from an industry perspective, and that really is, I think, one of the biggest reasons we've seen people pick up these guides and try and tackle these things, so we can help set what the footprint's going to be. And I think we've seen through the public-private partnerships with our colleagues at ONC and CMS that they're listening to folks that are going first and learning as we go. So I am so thankful for you all. This was a really great session. I'm excited it's recorded. And thanks for taking the time to come and redux this with us. So folks at HIMSS that weren't at HIMSS got to hear it.
Thank you again for presenting today. You're more than welcome to stay and participate in some of Jocelyn's discussions about ViVE and HIMSS. I know a couple of you have a hard stop and another commitment at the top of the hour. So without further ado, Jocelyn, I think we'll all go off camera and let you, and I'll advance your slides.
Awesome. Feel free to hang out, guys. Thank you. Thanks, guys. So really our goal for today is to talk a little bit about what we've been up to over the last quarter and bring back some findings. And you just heard, I think, a really great highlight of one of the conversations that was happening both at ViVE and HIMSS over the last couple of weeks. And it has been a insane couple of weeks. But one of the things I just want to reflect on is in the gear up for us to sort of do this spring season and us to get things finalized and approved for our budget year with members, we do a refresh of a lot of our collateral, and we recognize that many of you pick up images and content that we create from a DaVinci slideware perspective, and it makes its way into your own internal conversations, your internal slides, and into your collateral that you share with your partners. So we always want to make sure we give folks a chance to be able to see the latest and greatest of what we've created. So today is going to be a mix of updates, reflections, and sharing some of that content, some of this new content that we've revved for DaVinci sort of standard size. So I put this slide together actually last year when I was actually briefing the ONC certification team on sort of why DaVinci IGs were going to get implemented and why the EHRs would actually implement them. And it sort of morphed and lived on. And so we actually included it in the base deck for the beginning of this year. And I think that one of the things that any of us has encountered when we've been out talking about FHIR and APIs and isn't it wonderful and we're going to fix all the world's problems is, sort of bumping up against what's different about this time? Why is this really going to happen? We've been talking about fixing prior authorization or getting clinical data exchange at scale going, for years. Why is it different? And so I took a step back, and I think it's really important to look at sort of what is different about where we are as a point in time and sort of get us out of what we've been looking at for the last couple of years, which is sort of, talking about this continuum of ONC and CMS pushing us from a regulatory perspective to FHIR and APIs. Because it is a bigger picture than that. Reg and certification matters, right? And I do think that, as I was just saying moments ago, that information flow, that real world experience, that work we're doing to create the standards with private dollars and our CMS and ONC counterparts listening, nudging, right, with regulation and bringing everybody else along beyond this sort of party of the willing, I think is really important. I think the other thing that is real, and I think we've seen this at FHIR wholesale for a number of years, but really in the last year or two on the DaVinci side of the house is, we have some really insanely simple stories coming from implementers about the efficiency that they're seeing and the benefit that they and their partners are getting in moving their end users to API-based workflows. And if you haven't had an opportunity to hear the Cambia team that Dave is a part of, and MCG and Multicare talk about the success they've had in their limited rollout of the prior authorization workflows, take some time. We're posting everything to YouTube now, and it's literally 3 to 4 times turnaround improvements in throughput from nursing staff that are sitting in back offices during prior authorizations all day. And the number of reduced or near real-time answers to prior authorization compared to waiting days, 7, 10, 15, sometimes longer for an answer for a patient to get, on the regimen or the treatment program or the service. It's really remarkable when you think about what that compounding impact is on making our staff that is doing this work more efficient, reducing waste. It's remarkable. I think that you heard the team just before me talk really about this sea change that we're in, that I think with the business model shifting to value-based care and more at-risk contracting happening between payers and providers sort of on the right-hand side, that we're seeing really sort of old school mentality and barriers to a more rigid relationship and a hard wall between a payer and a provider, really changing. It's not 100%, nobody's Pollyanna-ish here, but that we're seeing really this need for bidirectional data exchange and the importance of clinical data exchange being recognized by people on both the provider and the payer side, and the payer really understanding getting that claims information to their folks at-risk contracts is really critically important. So I just think that, I think the message here is what's important. Maybe not my favorite data visualization, but I think that just wanted to make sure that we had a chance to share that with you guys. And then, Alex, if you can flip us, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the conversations that we've had and the progress that we've been making, sort of evangelizing out in industry. So at the end of February, we had a small team that went out to ViVE. And I first want to say thanks to Sandy Vance, who has always been a great advocate for giving time and space to both HL7 and to DaVinci inside of whatever activity she's working on. In this case, it happens to be the Interop Now Pavilion at ViVE, because we found it challenging to get main stage time there, even with some of the compelling story that we're doing. So we've really, I'd say, have been able to get access to be able to tell our stories. What was remarkable this time, so I did a 101. Alex Buggy wasn't able to travel to ViVE because of budget constraints. And so I did a readout on the rule and what that means and how DaVinci is going to help people become compliant with the rule in sort of a 30-minute session. And if you haven't seen that, as I mentioned just a minute ago, we're posting everything to a YouTube channel under HL7. And the link is here, and I'm sure my friend Leslie will drop it into the chat. But it's a different talk track than sort of the DaVinci 101 that we've been doing for years that we got really positive feedback on. So that might be worth a watch or a share with some of your colleagues. I have not seen it yet, but I think it went off well. And then we did our normal sort of FHIR panel, and I actually spent some time in the HL7 booth inside the Interop Now Pavilion, and a couple things that came across, I'd say, from that. First, I think 50% of the people that stopped to talk to us while I was in the booth wanted to know about DaVinci, wanted to know about the regs, wanted to know about 0057 and how FHIR was going to help them, which was remarkable. And then there were a number of informal conversations that were happening. So there was an informal roundtable sort of post our panel discussion, the HL7 panel discussion that Anise Chopra led, and Kirk Anderson and a number of other members, I think including the MCC team, were there to be able to sort of speak up and talk sort of from the audience about the real world experience. And then there was a FHIR implementer roundtable the second day where we were able to get to do some Q&A and to, I'd say, make it more accessible to people that were new to FHIR about what it really meant to go to a connectathon, what resources were available, how do people deal with not just the implementation of APIs, but the business transformation required for APIs to get done. My overall takeaway sort of in the time that we were there is that beyond sort of our scheduled content, pretty much everyone that was presenting in the Interop Now showcase was talking about FHIR, was demonstrating how they were implementing, and were telling stories across a number of the implementation guides. But the presence of even folks that aren't DaVinci members or aren't active members of our community talking about the rules and how they were gearing up and how these implementation guides were part of their roadmap was remarkable compared to previous ViVE meetings. There was, I'd say, sort of takeaways. We did a quick, just read out with folks that were there on site that, from a ViVE perspective, I think there were lots of really good discussions. There's a very strong vendor to vendor conversation that happens at ViVE because there's so many people that are there looking for funding and things like that. And that the storytelling that was happening in the Interop Now Pavilion was powerful. I would say sort of the one ding I would say is, in addition to sort of getting people on board and understanding sort of the impact of these changes, especially with the rule dropping, was we're trying to figure out how do we get out of the Interop Now sort of pavilion and into some of the more mainstream conversations around interoperability at ViVE. So that'll be sort of one of our takeaways from a project perspective. So that dovetails 2 weeks later, all singing, all dancing. We have a much bigger presence, and we plan for our membership actually supports a much bigger presence at HIMSS. And I think that that's come from years of really positive feedback and sort of I'd say the provider footprint that we see when we attend HIMSS. There were a number of activities that happened sort of, again, inside of the interoperability showcase. We purchased a kiosk, and we were, members both under the DaVinci umbrella, but also on their own. We're sort of up, down in these 20-minute spotlights throughout the 3 days that the exhibit hall was open. And then we had a number of members and community members sitting on panels, hosting presentations at the use case level or at panels. And again, across the board, really fantastic sort of like standing room only, rows of people standing behind chairs in the Interop showcase. Listening to, and I'd say a new set of faces, people that were not sort of our usual cast of characters. In addition to these presentations, we did a happy hour that was sort of standing room only on Monday night, which was great. And I was able to, and a number of our members participated in the Interop pre-conference on Monday. I think that to me, one of the great things that we're able to do is we actually scored some free space from HIMSS under HL7. And Bill Howard graciously, and a number of our other team members, and Vanessa Candelora held an informal working session over sort of offsite the Rosen. We got sort of space in a hotel for free from HIMSS. And the thing that was remarkable about that was, it was sort of last minute-y, but we did 2 topics, but it was really, this was post getting approval to, have the PMO get more involved in piloting and start to bring trebuchet back in-house. But also have the conversation for one of our guides that's a little bit younger and isn't part of a federal mandate. We got to spend some time talking about patient cost transparency and what would it really take and what are the barriers to get people to adopt that guide ahead of actual federal regulations. Because there we have law, but we have no regs yet, versus on the PDEC prior auth side, we have reg and people actively planning to implement and trying to get to that scaling piece, right, that you just heard the team describe. And so I think that, again, really strong interest. We had, 30 or so folks show up for that conversation sort of at the last minute and start to, I think, feed these ongoing conversations that we'll be continuing both under the trebuchet project, and then we'll be spinning up other conversations about piloting from a PCT perspective. So look forward to those and super excited about just the engagement from the community in what is a very busy space at HIMSS, right? There's 1,500 places people could be at any given moment that people carve the time out to do that. And we were able to actually invite all of the other QHIMSS to join that conversation. And I think Bill and I were both super excited about sort of the presence. And fast forward to the next day, Anish did another one of his roundtables. And for folks that don't know Anish Chopra, he's a former CTO. He's the first CTO of the US. He works for a company called Care Journey, but he is I'd say sort of FHIR's biggest cheerleader out in industry. It does a really good call to action for folks sort of in these public meetings. And so a number of the membership was able to join this call sort of midday, or this meeting, where there were a number of folks from the ONC, CMS, and other federal agencies. The undersecretary from the VA told some really great stories about some work the VA is doing about getting vets better access to care, and some APIs they've created for resources for folks that are needing support for suicide prevention, which was really remarkable. And so there's really this feeling sort of in that room of, the realness of this work. And I would say the call away from that session that I would say to folks is, I think we operate sort of in this bubble of the party of the willing. But that what we were able to do in that room, I think, was to have in a really grounded way a number of our DaVinci implementers. And it was great because it was actually providers, right? That, it's often harder to get sort of a provider voice, I think, in those public settings, share really good pragmatic experience around what is working and what some of the challenges were, I think, with some of those key influencers in the room. And this topic of being able to do FHIR under TEFCA, I think, got some really good exercise sort of in that public forum. So I'm thankful to everybody that made the time and carved again out sort of an hour or two in a very busy schedule to come and join that conversation. And for both events, you'll see on the right-hand side, we have a full listing of all of the different activities, and then we have slides and the actual videos where they've been shared with us for each of the presentations, and share those at will. We're really excited, and we'll do like what we did today with the Network FHIR team. We'll bring a select subset of some of those presentations to both our community roundtable, but also to other industry events. So super excited to have folks be able to exercise this content that they worked really hard to create. So the one call out I wanted to make sure that we did today for folks was to make sure that if you have a recording of a session where you're talking about the DaVinci guides, and you are not obviously selling your product in that session, we're more than happy to help share that content. So drop a note to DaVinci PMO if you have content that you'd like to share. And I was going to say thank you, Leslie, for sharing the link out to the YouTube channel. I'm really excited. This is a really simple, but as you guys can imagine, labor-intensive change for us to make. I think it's going to make us really get, I think, a second and third life out of a lot of this content that we are creating for these in-person events. So, and then I think that really from a note perspective, I'm looking at time. I know Mike was at ViVE, and Jim and Karuna were also at HIMSS as well. I don't know if there's any other sort of color commentary sort of about this realness factor or sort of your takeaways from the two events that you'd want to share with the group.
Yeah, I'd just say that DaVinci and FHIR we're seeing not just in and of themselves, but in the context of other things, particularly business for payers and providers. And in addition to that, I was privileged to be on a panel with Tim Bennett from Drummond, and the important piece there is that just doing FHIR and demonstrating that you can connect with someone else, while is an important first step, is not the end game. We need to be interoperable across each other so that as new organizations join the ecosystem, that you can be interoperable with all of them as well. So the place of certification and accreditation is going to be increasingly important as we go forward.
I'd like to thank Mike for pre-selling next month's Community Roundtable. Jim or Karuna, any other thoughts from you guys?
Yeah, I would just echo Mike's sentiments around, having DaVinci on your booth is definitely a flex now. And a lot of the conversations are tying more and more together. And I think the Trebuchet project, adds another piece to the puzzle. So it'll be good to start to expand beyond this group and tie the dots together with TEFCA and Sequoia and, some of the other accelerators within HL7. So I'm excited for, that horizon as we move forward.
Jimmy, you want to chime in?
I don't know that I could add a whole lot. I would just say that in terms of making it real, obviously the regulation that is facing us is causing a lot of folks to look at this in a different way. I, for one, am very pleased to see that the regulation has landed and that we now have targets. I think, in terms of making it real, the prior authorization work that is necessary to respond to that regulation is intense. There is a lot of work to be done. Not the DaVinci part of it is maybe the easier part of it. Honestly, it's the back office things that payers need to be able to address, and assume would see that something similar on the provider side. It's becoming real because of the regulation, because of the work that a number of us are out there doing to try to get actual implementations in place. In the case of the Trebuchet project, we're looking to have production deployments of the CDEX work and the prior authorization work by June of this year. So that's pretty real. And I think what would be very helpful in making it more real is that we get others to join where, for example, a payer and a provider that don't know one another, that aren't in the same market, are actually exchanging information across a national network in a trusted framework way. I guess, Jocelyn, that's what my thoughts would be. Regulation is great. It's pushing us to do things we might not otherwise do, but we need to take up the mantle now and move that forward.
Jim, I think that's great. That's a great segue. One of my reverbs, sort of with my strategy hat on, coming out of the sessions over the last couple of weeks, was we spent a lot of time talking about getting connected. And I think you've heard this team really talk about sort of how do we take the power of what's happening from a network perspective, so that we can actually, I would think of in sort of like YouTube or Instagram kind of fashion, like how do we get to the good stuff, which is really the content and the use cases, and not just about getting connected, but actually getting those workflows in place. And again, thankful for the work that's happening out there in industry. And the conversation is shifting, right? People are talking about data quality. People are understanding why they need to IG and not just ship around documents any longer. And not that that's bad. It's just how do we continue to sort of move up that value chain and be able to expand. So with that, Alex, I'm going to have you, just looking at time, I'm going to have you flip to, So there's a couple of slides. I'm going to just do a quick run through for you guys. A couple of things I would note since we were last together and sort of gave more of a PMO update. The first is we've actually added a bunch of members this year. And if you're interested, there's always more than happy to have people join the project and help support this work. This is the work of many. And we have been really excited to have both Blue Cross Blue Shield South Carolina, which also represents their Palmetto team, join the project. Health Gorilla, CoHear, eHealth Exchange, as you heard Bill talk earlier, made the decision to join last fall as a 2023 member late in the year into 2024. Blue California joined, Highmark has joined, though we don't have their logo up yet. And actually Availity sponsored Baptist in Jacksonville to actually join from a provider perspective. So really excited about that. And there's a couple other links here just as resources. The slides that I'm using are actually available, as well as the videos and the YouTube channel, all from the main DaVinci page on Confluence, but we've put some quick links in here for folks to be able to share it with your colleagues. And then I always remind folks sort of that second line item there, the use case progress line. That's sort of a surfer page that we created, a dashboard, so that you can get to any of the components of a use case, the page with the notes and the meeting times, as well as the actual implementation guide links, as well as the the reference implementation, the sample code that we provide, because we know that sometimes it's not easy to find stuff on Confluence. And then that link at the very top is actually just a tiny URL we created that actually has a QR code. If anybody's interested in the QR code, we can get it to you. that we allows people to get to our welcome page. It has a lot of sort of background information on DaVinci, and we'll leave up sort of all the summary information that we put up there for HIMSS for a couple more weeks. One thing I would note, and I want to make sure that folks have eyeballs on, one of the other things we've been doing since the beginning of the year is gap analysis from the HTI-1 rule about moving everybody to the latest version to the next version of US CDI. And so that analysis has been complete, and the team has been working, each of the use case leads and our technical team on the project has been working on a transition strategy about how we're going to move from one version of US CDI to the next, and also how are we going to do that, operate that on an ongoing basis. So there's a framework that's shared here that we've started to review with the membership, with the idea that once DaVinci is sort of bought into this, we'd like to bring it back into HL7 as a recommendation and a framework for how we moving from versions through SVAP going forward, understanding we're going to learn as we go, but also some early decisions and signaling of where we're headed on a guide by guide basis, because each of the guides has different considerations based on the content itself, and just how mature that guide is and how widely it's been used in production already. So if you have production code with DaVinci APIs at this point in time, I would really love to get somebody on your team to look at this. My plea to the membership has really been getting people that are in DevOps roles and product roles and architecture roles to look at this, because we want to make sure that we're getting sort of all brains on this topic, because this is really how we're going to work going forward. And it will evolve, but we'd love to have opinions sooner rather than later if we're doing something horribly wrong. I'm going to stop trying to advance the slides on my side and ask Alex to move me to the next slide. Another sort of update slide for you guys from a project perspective. We are excited that we actually have officially approved our postable remittance use case to go live. It's actually been in discovery inside of the project for quite a bit of time. And this is literally to be able to help providers track down duplicate remits via FHIR, because there's some challenges with how you do that in EDI today. And so we'll be launching that use case. So if you're not on the listserv, join the listserv, because that's how we'll notify you when and where the calls are happening. They will get listed in the HL7 the HL7 calendar once they become public. And other things that I would say we're focused on from a program perspective, we finalized our goals for this year at the beginning of the month, is really supporting HDI1 and 0057, looking at future enhancements on a use case by use case. And as you heard us talk about earlier, both on the building awareness and building adoption, what does it really mean for us to support implementers? There's another set of work under that CMS support around really a discussion around how we're going to deal with CQL and the need or desire to do some standardization around how we leverage CQL in our guides. And so look for more information via the listserv. There are sort of day-to-day conversations happening at a use case level there, but we'll be spinning up some resources and some teams to, I'd say, have some lively discussions about CQL usage and normalization inside of DaVinci guides in the coming months. And then, again, not surprising, we'll continue to be out here in industry talking to you guys about what is working and people telling those stories and bringing other people into the fold. Alex, can you flip to the next slide? I just pulled just a really simple slide just from a CMS 0057 perspective. I think that one of the questions we field a lot is, why is it not required? Why is it recommended? So I had put together some key thoughts, just I'd say amplifying messaging that we're hearing from our CMS colleagues and sort of the practicality about how standards work today in industry. And I think that a couple of takeaways, right? We're seeing very clearly that there's a lot of alignment between what is happening in CMS's regs with ONC, and that CMS recognizes these guides aren't final, and that we don't want to get pegged to an earlier version, but they recognize providing that industry alignment is really important. I think that, when we think about sort of, you heard the call to action from your colleagues earlier in the call, I think that we know that the way we work together today to build standards is different than how we did it for the previous 20 years. And so if your team isn't bringing folks forward to participate, I think you should really think about how and where you need to be involved based on your business priorities to help be part of sort of this testing and cyclical iterative way that we're developing standards if you're not already. And then if you can flip to the next slide, Alex. And that segues nicely to the fact that you are going to have 3 opportunities between now and the fall to test DaVinci implementation guides. The next, as you heard Alex say earlier, the next Connectathon is the weekend before work group meeting in Dallas. And we are going to have a number of tracks that we'll be supporting. There will be people active and engaged in testing. Each of these guides are at a different point in maturity. You know, I think at this point in time, we're getting crowds of 30 to 60 people testing the burden rejection IGs, you know, versus our value-based performance reporting IG is a little bit younger and newer. And so there might not be as many people actively testing, but we will have somebody there to support that track. And I'm sure a handful of people there picking up the reference implementation and putting it through its paces. So if you haven't made plans to come and test, I would say pick something. I'm going to channel Mike Gould, do something, pick a part. It doesn't have to be end-to-end testing across the entire guide, but get your team members engaged and pick up these guides and use them, because you'll learn literally just from the people sitting to your right and your left if you're there in person. And if you have a team that can't be in person, the CMS team has been hosting a virtual Connectathon every July for the last few years. And that is a really great place to bootstrap your team if you haven't been involved or you don't have sort of the T&E budget to put people on planes to get to a Connectathon. And we will do a series for the people going to Connectathon. We'll do a series of breakout sessions on topics like that CQL topic and the USCDI topic that I just talked about. And we'll do deeper dives on some of our new use cases as well, newer use cases at Connectathon. So always a good learning opportunity. And then I would be remiss if I did not mention that we continue to bring content to this monthly meeting. And so if you want to make sure that you're getting the updates and the invites for this monthly meeting, make sure you're on the listserv, which is on that welcome page that's listed here. And I think we have one more slide, Alex, I think, to clear. Nope, I think that actually brings us home for this month.
Okay, it does. You know, I think it's really important, the idea of just take one step, Jocelyn. I really appreciate you channeling Mike Gould there again, because I've also just recently heard on a leads call, you know, even the observers that come who, you know, are just trying to learn and start to grasp things, actually ask questions that help the implementation guide writers and testers think about things differently. And so you can start as an observer and then dive deeper into the pool later. And then our April event, as you've heard a couple times, April Community Roundtable is going to help you understand how to prepare for a Connectathon. There is some advanced work you need to do if you're going to be testing. It's a little bit lighter if you're just going to be coming as an observer. And so, Mike, I see you come on screen. Did you want to do a plug for any of that?
Yeah, just, you know, there was a time where I went to my first Connectathon and, you know, I observed. And there was another time when I went and I tried to do something, it didn't work. And, you know, you know, making those mistakes is a great way to learn, and you have a community around you that'll help you figure it all out. So certainly come and make use of the collective brain that we have around us.
One of the
Yeah,
things that to tout also, it's not just about, like Jocelyn mentioned, that we'll have the Connectathon experience, and there's one in September. And that September meeting, if you want to plan ahead for a travel budget, might be really good to think about, because it's going to be a working group meeting plus. So it's going to have maybe some things that are more interesting to the business analyst or
technical
folks, not just the technical folks. So keep an eye out for that upcoming agenda, because it'll be a split meeting, not just working group sessions.
I think that's a really good call out. Anything that we haven't covered, Alex, today that we're supposed to have covered?
Yeah, you know what? I think it's been a great set of conversations today. I think that we are entering a new era, and it's really neat to hear about the fact that we're going to be taking on pilots more actively as a part of the DaVinci community, both in the trebuchet networked FHIR environment, but also in the patient cost transparency realm. I think that's really important as we help create a world where there are no surprises. It's a new era for us as the DaVinci project, leading a little bit more into that. So I think people should stay tuned for that, and another opportunity for them to think about getting involved, whether they're just drinking from the fire hose or helping to program the fire hose. So at that point, I think that we can give everybody back a few minutes of their day, Jocelyn.
Awesome. Thank you again. So thankful for all you. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Leslie, for your support today.
Thank you to everybody, and we look forward to seeing you back next month, April 24th. Please complete the survey to give us feedback because we do take it to heart. Take care.